In part 2, I told you that J.P. Morgan sailed his yacht into Kiel Harbour in July 1902 to have a meeting with Kaiser Wilhelm. That meeting was between J.P. Morgan, Kaiser Wilhelm, Albert Ballin, the Director General of HAPAG, Heinrich Wiegand, the Director General of Norddeutsche Lloyd, and Lord William Peary, the Chairman of Hartland and Wolff. Now, yesterday in part 2, I said that JP Morgan went on a European ocean liner buying spree, and that after buying up all of the British liners, he set his sights on Germany. I said that JP Morgan expected these German shipping giants to fold just like the British did. And I said that these German companies already had an economic weapon that Wall Street couldn't touch. I need to pause here and correct that framing. This hostile takeover story is corporate propaganda. When you follow the primary documents, this framing of Wall Street versus the German shippers completely falls apart. JP Morgan did not hit a wall in 1902 that blocked him from buying these German liners. These German liners were already controlled by Wall Street. Guess who I found sitting on the supervisory board at HAGAP from 1901 onwards? This is Max Warburg. And he wasn't just an investor. Albert Ballin's private villa guest book records Max visiting his home at least 43 times. Ballin was the godfather to Max's son. Now, look across the ocean to Wall Street. Running the New York investment bank Kuhn Loeb and Company were Max's two brothers, Paul and Felix. Max was a senior partner at M.M. Warburg & Co. This bank still exists, and it's still privately owned by the same Warburg family that owned it 220 years ago. Max sat on the HAPAG advisory board, and he was the personal financial advisor to Kaiser Wilhelm. While his two brothers, Paul and Felix, were in New York running the investment bank that was funding the transcontinental railways. In Hamburg, Max financed the ocean liners, and in New York, Paul and Felix financed the trains taking passengers from the docks to the Midwestern factories. The primary cargo that moved through this loop was human beings, specifically Eastern European Jewish refugees fleeing violent pogroms. Albert Ballin is quoted as saying, "Without steerage passengers, I would be bankrupt in a matter of weeks." In 1892, there was a cholera outbreak in Hamburg that killed 8,000 people. The Prussian state blamed this on poor Russian Jewish refugees. They declared this a public health emergency, and the social panic around diseased Jewish refugees was leveraged to deregulate and strip away public oversight. The state's border functions were privatized and handed to this corporate syndicate. HAPAG and Norddeutsche Lloyd were handed massive state contracts to build, staff, and fund a network of border control stations, Kontrollstationen. It was agreed that these shipping lines would hire medical staff and install steam disinfection machinery. In return, the Prussian Ministry of the Interior stationed Prussian border police at these private facilities. Prussian border police, the Grenzpolizei, stopped every immigrant entering Prussia. If a refugee held a valid ticket for one of these liners and they passed a medical inspection, they were then placed onto sealed Auswandererzüge, emigrant trains. They were then transported from that border stop directly to Hamburg or the Bremen docks so that they didn't set foot in any Prussian towns. If one of these refugees held a ticket for any competing non-German shipping line, such as the British White Star or Cunard, Prussian police turned them back under the pretext of medical unfitness. That alone should tell you. They said that this was a pandemic, but then they turned people away if they held a ticket for a competing shipping line, regardless of how sick they were. These people weren't sick. This is disaster capitalism. I will explain what disaster capitalism is, but first I want to show you who was involved in this. Berthold zu Eulenburg was the Prussian ministry president and minister for the interior. This is who authorized the initial privatization of state border control functions. Ernst von Köhler was the Prussian minister for the interior who signed the formal administrative decree expanding station police powers. They had worked with Albert Ballin, the director of HAPAG, with Heinrich Wiegand, the director of Norddeutscher Lloyd, and their banker, Max Warburg. He had arranged the credit lines that built both of these steamship fleets and the transit station infrastructure. When JP Morgan tried to enter the transatlantic trade with his International Mercantile Marine Company Trust, Ballin and Warburg already held the legal contracts for the Prussian border stations. If Morgan tried to fight HAPAG, then the Prussian border police would simply block any IMM ticketed passengers from crossing the border. This forced Morgan to sit down with these men in Kiel Harbour in 1902 and sign an Interessengemeinschaft, Community of Interest Agreement. This officially brought JP Morgan into a profit-sharing network built on 1894 Prussian border decrees. In the next video, I want to talk about what happened to these refugees when they arrived on Ellis Island. And I want to tell you about the history of Kuhn, Loeb & Co. The same year that the Prussian state declared a health emergency, the United States also passed the Quarantine Act of 1893. This looks like it's in reaction to the surge of immigration bringing cholera to the United States, but in actuality, it created an excuse to round up and detain people without question on the basis that they might be sick. I mentioned that this looks like disaster capitalism. I did a video about a year ago that explains this in full. It was removed from TikTok, but it's available here on YouTube if you want to watch it. Disaster capitalism is a phrase most closely associated with the author Naomi Klein. She uses this phrase, disaster capitalism, in the book The Shock Doctrine. Disaster capitalism is a term for the way states and corporations use crises, war, coups, natural disasters, economic crashes, climate shocks, to push through privatization, to push through deregulation, to push through anything that under normal conditions you would say fuck no to. In the context of 1892 Hamburg, a cholera outbreak was killing people. That's the disaster. 8,000 people have died. That disaster event can be legitimate, there really is a cholera outbreak, or it can be manufactured. A crisis strikes and it creates a policy vacuum. The state panics about health costs and immigration liabilities. And the oligarch steps in with a solution. How close the oligarch was to manufacturing the crisis is usually hard to distinguish, but they always have an answer. In this case, Albert Ballin and Max Warburg step in and offer to build private disinfection hubs at train stations. In return for their help seemingly managing this health crisis, the Prussian state handed over its border police. And those border police were used to block any refugee holding a ticket for a competing shipping line and force them onto these HAPAG ships. So the original cholera crisis was converted into a permanent, state-enforced human trafficking network. Let's get into what actually happened to these people when they arrived in the United States and who benefited from that.